Picture this. You're a wealthy Roman merchant walking through the bustling streets of Rome in 150 AD. The morning sun glints off marble temples, the smell of fresh bread wafts from a nearby bakery, and the sound of merchants hawking their wares fills the air. You're heading to meet an important client, so you stop at what looks like a public restroom, a Fullonica, the Romans called it, to freshen up before your meeting. But as you step inside, something feels off. Instead of the pleasant scents you'd expect, there's an overwhelming smell of ammonia that makes your eyes water. You watch in confusion as workers collect buckets of liquid from the public urinals lining the walls. Then you notice something that makes your stomach turn. Those same workers are using that collected urine to wash expensive togas, brush their teeth, and even treat leather goods that will be sold in the Forum tomorrow. Welcome to ancient Rome, where human urine wasn't waste. It was one of the empire's most valuable commodities. And what the Romans did with it represents one of the most bizarre, yet ingenious systems in recorded history. A system so profitable that emperors taxed it, so essential that entire industries depended on it, and so shocking that when you learn the full extent of how urine shaped Roman daily life, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. Before diving into these forgotten stories of Roman innovation and the surprising truth behind the empire's success, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand how Romans came to value urine so highly, you must first understand the economic and social structure that made such a system not just possible, but necessary. Rome in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD was a metropolis of over 1 million people, the largest city the Western world had ever seen. This wasn't just a political capital, it was a manufacturing powerhouse where textile production, leatherworking, and chemical processing supported the lifestyle of an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt. The key to understanding Roman urine collection lies in chemistry that the Romans understood intuitively, even if they couldn't explain it scientifically. Human urine contains urea, which breaks down into ammonia through bacterial action. This ammonia is an incredibly powerful cleaning agent, a natural bleach, and a chemical that can break down fats and oils in ways that ancient soaps simply couldn't match. The Romans discovered this property and built an entire economic infrastructure around it. But here's what makes this particularly fascinating. The collection of urine wasn't some marginal activity conducted in secret. It was a mainstream, publicly accepted industry that operated in plain sight throughout the city. Large ceramic vessels called dolia were placed on street corners specifically for public urination. These weren't hidden in alleyways or disguised. They stood prominently at intersections, in forums, outside temples, and near public buildings. Roman citizens of all classes would use them throughout the day, and workers called Vespasianos would collect the contents multiple times daily, transporting them to the fullonicae, the combination laundries and chemical processing plants that formed the backbone of Rome's textile industry. The Emperor Vespasian, who ruled from 69 to 79 AD, saw the economic potential in this system and made a decision that would echo through history. He imposed a tax on urine collection, the vectigal urinae, turning public urination into a revenue stream for the imperial treasury. When his son Titus objected to the indignity of taxing such a substance, Vespasian allegedly held up a gold coin, had Titus smell it, and asked, "Does it smell?" When Titus said no, Vespasian replied, "Yet it comes from urine. Sium." This phrase, pecunia non olet, money doesn't smell, became one of the most famous sayings in Roman history, a testament to the pragmatic Roman approach to economics. But what exactly were the Romans doing with all this collected urine? The answer reveals a world far stranger and more comprehensive than you might imagine. The primary use was in the fullonicae, the ancient world's version of industrial laundries and dry cleaners. These weren't small operations. Archaeological excavations in Pompeii have revealed fullonicae that occupied entire city blocks, with dozens of workers and multiple processing stations. The process began when customers brought in their togas, tunics, and other woolen garments for cleaning. Romans wore wool extensively, and wool has a particular problem. It absorbs body oils, sweat, and dirt deep into its fibers, making it incredibly difficult to clean with water alone. The fullers, as these workers were called, had developed a sophisticated multi-step process that revolved around aged urine. Yes, aged. Fresh urine wasn't potent enough. The fullers would collect urine and store it in large vats for days or even weeks, allowing the urea to break down fully into ammonia. The smell must have been absolutely overwhelming. Ancient sources describe the area around Fullonica as having an odor that could be detected from blocks away. Once the urine had aged properly, the real work began. Fullers would place the dirty garments in large basins, add the aged urine, and then, here's where it gets truly remarkable, they would climb into the basins and stomp on the clothes for hours. Imagine spending your entire workday, from sunrise to sunset, standing barefoot in a mixture of human urine and dirty water, trampling expensive togas while the ammonia burns your skin and the fumes make your eyes water. Ancient sources describe how fullers developed distinctive calloused feet and how the skin on their legs would become permanently discolored from constant exposure to the chemicals. But the trampling served a crucial purpose. The mechanical action, combined with the chemical properties of ammonia, created a cleaning process that actually worked. The ammonia broke down the oils and fats in the wool. The agitation from stomping worked the liquid deep into the fibers, and the extended soaking time allowed even stubborn stains to dissolve. After hours of this treatment, the garments would be rinsed repeatedly in clean water, stretched on wooden frames to dry, and then brushed with thistle plants to raise the nap of the wool, creating a soft, fluffy texture. The most expensive togas and garments would undergo an additional step, bleaching with sulfur fumes, to achieve the brilliant white color that signified status and wealth in Roman society. But even this was enhanced by the initial urine treatment, which prepared the fabric to accept the bleaching more effectively. What you're about to hear next reveals just how deeply urine penetrated every aspect of Roman daily life, far beyond simple laundry. Roman tanners used urine extensively in leather production, and the process was as intricate as it was unpleasant. When an animal hide arrived at a tannery, it was covered in fat, tissue, and hair, none of which could remain if the leather was to be usable. The first step was called baiting, and it involved soaking the hide in a solution of water and aged urine for days. The ammonia in the urine broke down the proteins that held the hair to the hide, allowing workers to scrape it off easily. More importantly, the urine bath made the leather fibers swell and separate, creating a material that was soft, pliable, and able to absorb the tanning agents that would preserve it. Ancient Roman tanneries, like Fullonicae, were placed on the outskirts of cities, not out of shame, but because the smell was so intense that city ordinances required it. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows that tanneries had their own dedicated urine collection systems, with pipes running from public latrines directly to the tanning vats. The workers in these facilities spent their entire lives breathing ammonia fumes, and skeletal remains show evidence of respiratory damage consistent with chronic chemical exposure. But tanning was just the beginning. Roman physicians used urine medicinally, and here the historical record becomes almost surreal. Pliny the Elder, writing in his Natural History around 77 AD, dedicated extensive passages to the medical properties of human urine. He claimed that fresh urine could cure snake bites, scorpion stings, and skin infections. He recommended using aged urine as a mouthwash for gum disease. Most bizarrely, he suggested that drinking one's own urine could cure a variety of internal ailments. Was there any truth to these claims? Modern science suggests that the antibacterial properties of ammonia might have provided some genuine benefit for minor wounds, preventing infection in an era before antibiotics. But the Romans took these practices to extremes that would horrify modern medical practitioners. Roman soldiers on campaign were taught to urinate on wounds to prevent infection. Roman mothers would sometimes wash their infants' faces with urine to prevent rashes. Wealthy Romans paid premium prices for the urine of specific individuals, young women who ate healthy diets, or athletes in peak physical condition, believing that the quality of the source affected the medicinal properties. This brings us to perhaps the most shocking revelation of all: oral hygiene. Romans didn't just use urine externally, they put it in their mouths. The poet Catullus, writing in the 1st century BC, mocked a Spanish acquaintance for brushing his teeth with urine, suggesting that in Iberia, modern Spain and Portugal, the practice was so common that the whiter your teeth, the more urine you must have consumed. The poet wrote, "Ignatius, because he has white teeth, smiles everywhere. Now you're Spanish. In the country of Spain, what each man pisses, he's accustomed to brush his teeth and gums with in the morning. So the fact that your teeth are so polished just shows you're the more full of piss." But this wasn't just a provincial Spanish custom. Archaeological evidence suggests it was widespread throughout the Roman Empire. Small ceramic containers with residue analysis showing urea compounds have been found in wealthy Roman homes, stored alongside other toiletries. The ammonia in urine acted as a primitive whitening agent, and in a society obsessed with appearance and status, white teeth were a valuable social asset. Imagine the morning routine of a wealthy Roman patriarch. He wakes in his domus, surrounded by frescoed walls and mosaic floors. His slave brings him a small cup of aged urine, not from just anyone, but from a specific source known for its quality. He takes a mouthful, swishes it around his teeth and gums, the burning sensation of ammonia making his eyes water, and then spits it into a basin. His slave hands him a cloth to wipe his mouth, and then the day begins. To him, this is no more unusual than using toothpaste would be to us. It's simply part of being civilized, part of maintaining the appearance expected of his station. But the economics of urine became even more complex when you consider who was collecting it and how the collection system actually functioned on a day-to-day basis. The collectors, often called Vespasianos, after the emperor who taxed their trade, occupied one of the lowest rungs on the Roman social ladder, but they were essential to the urban economy. These men, always men, as this was considered too degrading even for female slaves, would make rounds throughout the city multiple times per day, emptying the public urine vessels and transporting the contents to fullonicae, tanneries, and other facilities that purchased in bulk. Contemporary sources describe how these collectors developed a distinctive gait from carrying the heavy, sloshing containers. They wrapped cloth around their hands and arms to protect against spills because the ammonia would burn skin on contact. The smell that clung to them was so distinctive that other Romans would cross the street to avoid passing too close. Despite providing an essential service, Vespasianos were socially marginalized, unable to enter temples or public baths until they had thoroughly washed and changed their clothing. Yet here's the twist. Some Vespasianos became remarkably wealthy. The best collectors developed exclusive contracts with specific fullonicae, guaranteeing a steady income. They employed slaves or freedmen to work routes while they managed the business. Tax records from Egypt, preserved on papyrus, show that successful urine merchants could earn several times what a common laborer made, enough to eventually buy their freedom if they were slaves, or to retire comfortably if they were freedmen. The public urinae themselves were architectural features, carefully designed and strategically placed. They weren't crude buckets left on street corners. Many were decorated with artistic flourishes, inscribed with jokes or advertisements for nearby businesses. Some were heated in winter to encourage use. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows that these vessels were emptied so regularly that residue buildup was minimal, suggesting a highly organized collection system with scheduled routes and multiple pickups per day. What happened next in the evolution of this system reveals how the Romans turned something we consider disgusting into an empire-wide industry. By the 2nd century AD, the urine trade had become so sophisticated that specialized merchants acted as middlemen, purchasing bulk quantities from collectors and reselling to specific industries based on quality. Not all urine was equal. Morning urine, more concentrated after a night's sleep, commanded higher prices. Urine from people who ate meat-heavy diets was considered superior for tanning. Vegetarian urine was preferred for textile processing because it contained fewer compounds that could discolor fabric. This led to an unusual social practice. Wealthy Romans who ate premium diets could actually sell their urine for higher prices. Some households had arrangements with local Vespasianos to purchase their household's daily production. Slaves in wealthy homes were sometimes given specific diets to improve the quality of their urine, which the household would then sell. The economics were compelling enough that agricultural manuals from the period discuss urine collection from farm workers as a legitimate supplementary income stream for rural estates. The city of Rome consumed so much urine in its industries that local production wasn't sufficient. Merchants imported aged urine from the provinces, transported in sealed amphorae aboard ships that must have been unbearable to sail on. Archaeological excavations of a Roman shipwreck off the coast of southern France revealed cargo holds containing hundreds of amphorae that residue analysis confirmed held urine being transported from Gaul to Italy. The mind boggles at the logistics. Someone had to collect it, someone had to age it, someone had to seal it in transport containers, someone had to load it onto ships, and someone had to unload it and distribute it to customers, all for human waste. But the strangest aspect of the Roman urine economy was how completely normalized it became. Children growing up in Rome learned to use public urinae as naturally as they learned to use public fountains. The distinction between different types of urine, fresh versus aged, male versus female, dietary variations, was common knowledge, discussed openly in markets and homes. Fullones, tanners, and urine collectors weren't hidden away. They were visible parts of daily urban life, their businesses operating alongside bakeries, butcher shops, and metal workers. Roman literature is filled with casual references to urine and its uses, treated not as shocking or disgusting, but as mundane facts of life. Martial's epigrams joke about it. Pliny's encyclopedic natural history discusses it alongside herbs and minerals. Legal texts outline regulations for urine collection and sale. Medical texts prescribe it for various ailments. It wasn't taboo, it was simply ordinary. This normalization extended into Roman religion and ritual. Despite their very practical uses of human waste, Romans maintained complex purity laws for religious ceremonies that seem contradictory to modern eyes. A priest couldn't perform certain rituals after visiting a Fullonica, not because of religious prohibition against urine itself, but because the smell was considered too strong for the gods. Yet those same priests would recommend urine-based remedies for illness, seeing no contradiction between ritual purity and practical medicine. The truth was far darker than this utilitarian picture suggests, though, because the urine economy created victims, the workers whose lives were destroyed by constant exposure to ammonia. Skeletal remains from Roman cemeteries, identified as belonging to fullers and tanners, show distinctive patterns of damage. Their lung tissue, where preserved in unusual conditions, displays scarring consistent with chronic ammonia exposure. Their bones show evidence of arthritis developing at young ages, particularly in the feet and legs, the result of spending hours daily stomping in chemical baths. Their teeth, ironically, often show less decay than average Romans, possibly because of constant ammonia exposure, but their jawbones show unusual deterioration patterns, suggesting other types of chemical damage. These weren't isolated cases. Entire families worked in Fullonicae, with children as young as 7 or 8 beginning apprenticeships in the trade. Ancient sources describe how fullers' children had a distinctive smell that never quite washed off, how their skin became thick and discolored, how they developed chronic coughs that started in adolescence and worsened throughout their lives. The life expectancy of a fuller or tanner was significantly shorter than average for the period, itself a time when average life expectancy was only around 40 years for those who survived childhood. What modern doctors would recognize as chemical burns were simply accepted as part of the job. Fullers developed thick calluses on their feet, but beneath those calluses, The constant exposure to ammonia caused tissue damage that never healed. Some workers became effectively crippled by middle age, unable to continue the stomping work that had destroyed their bodies. Most had no savings and no alternative skills, leaving them dependent on charity or starving in Rome's streets. The economic incentive structure made the situation worse. Fullonicae operated on thin profit margins and intense competition. Owners pushed workers to process more garments faster, meaning longer hours standing in ammonia baths. Workers who complained or slowed down were easily replaced. Rome had an enormous population of slaves and desperately poor freedmen willing to take any job. The power dynamic was absolute, and the suffering was systematic. But this wasn't slavery in the sense of chattel bondage for most workers. Many fullers and tanners were technically free men, paid wages, legally able to leave their employment. The reality, however, was that once you started working in these industries, no other employer would hire you. The smell, the discoloration of your skin, the distinctive physical damage, these marked you permanently as a fuller or tanner. You were economically trapped in an industry that was slowly killing you. Ancient graffiti from Pompeii gives us glimpses into the psychology of these workers. One inscription, scratched into the wall of a Fullonica, reads, "Whoever you are who reads this, I pray you take pity on the fullers, for they endure much." Another, darker message found in a tannery. "May the gods curse the day I learned this trade." These weren't the complaints of slaves longing for freedom. These were free men trapped by economics in work that destroyed them. The turning point came not from humanitarian concerns, but from changing economic conditions in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. As Rome's population declined and the economic vitality of the empire waned, the large-scale industrial operations that had characterized the height of Roman power began to contract. Fullonicae closed as demand for processed textiles decreased. Tanneries moved operations to the provinces where labor was cheaper and regulations more lax. The sophisticated urine collection system that had made Rome function broke down, not because Romans suddenly found it distasteful, but because the economic incentives disappeared. Christianity's spread through the empire beginning in the 4th century AD did introduce new attitudes toward bodily functions and cleanliness that gradually shifted cultural norms. Christian writers expressed disgust at many Roman practices, including the use of urine in medicine and grooming. Saint Jerome, writing in the late 4th century, condemned the use of urine for tooth whitening as a vain and shameful practice. Early Christian hygiene practices emphasized water-based cleansing, viewing the elaborate Roman chemical processes as excessive and worldly. But the change was gradual, not revolutionary. As late as the 6th century AD, long after the Western Roman Empire had fallen, Byzantine sources describe continued use of urine in textile processing, though on a much reduced scale. Medieval European fullers would rediscover these techniques, though they preferred to use animal urine rather than human, perhaps influenced by Christian attitudes about human dignity and the proper treatment of the human body. What happened to the last generation of fullers and tanners as their industry collapsed is a story of quiet tragedy. Without the demand for their services, without the network of urine collection and distribution, these workers found themselves not just unemployed, but unemployable. They had spent their lives developing skills that were suddenly worthless. They bore on their bodies the permanent evidence of their former occupation, marking them as undesirable for other work. Many ended up among the urban poor, their expertise in chemical processing meaningless in a contracting economy. Some attempted to continue traditional practices on a small scale, but without the infrastructure of collection and distribution, without the dense urban population to support specialized crafts, the economics didn't work. A family-run Fullonica might struggle along for a generation, but eventually, the knowledge and techniques would die with the last practitioner. Perhaps most tragically, the medical uses of urine didn't disappear as quickly as the industrial uses. Medieval and even early modern medical texts continued to recommend urine-based treatments, long after the Romans who had developed these practices were dust. The difference was that medieval physicians, unlike the pragmatic Romans, developed elaborate theoretical justifications for why urine worked, based on humoral theory and other pseudoscientific frameworks. The Romans had simply known empirically that it did work, at least sometimes for certain purposes. The medieval physicians were convinced they understood why, and they were wrong. The real innovation of the Romans wasn't that they used urine, many ancient cultures did in various ways, but that they systematized it, industrialized it, and turned it into an empire-wide economic infrastructure. They saw a chemical resource that everyone produced daily and built sophisticated systems to collect it, process it, distribute it, and apply it to multiple industries. It was brilliant, practical problem-solving on a massive scale. But it came at a cost measured in destroyed bodies, shortened lives, and systematic exploitation of the most vulnerable members of society. The fullers who gave their health so that senators could wear brilliant white togas have no monuments. The tanners who spent their lives breathing ammonia to make leather for Roman legions are forgotten. The Vespasianos who carried buckets of urine through city streets left almost no trace in the historical record. What makes the Roman urine economy so haunting isn't just the bizarre nature of the practice itself, or even the suffering it caused. It's how completely it reveals the logic of imperial Rome: pragmatic, efficient, ruthless, and utterly unconcerned with the human cost of its systems. The same empire that built roads connecting 3 continents, that created legal codes influencing modern law, that produced literature studied 2,000 years later, also created an economic system that slowly poisoned thousands of workers because it was practical and profitable. Behind every historical narrative of Roman grandeur, the marble forums, the triumphal arches, the senators in their brilliant togas, there are individual human stories of people whose labor made that grandeur possible. The fuller trampling clothes in ammonia for 12 hours a day wasn't thinking about the glory of Rome. He was thinking about his burning feet, his rasping cough, his worry about whether he'd be able to keep working next year or the year after. He was a real person with hopes and fears and loved ones, and his story matters just as much as the emperors and generals who fill the history books. The Roman urine economy reminds us that human societies will normalize almost anything if the economic incentives are strong enough and the people affected are powerless enough. It reminds us that innovation and progress often come at human costs that aren't recorded in the celebratory histories. It reminds us that suffering can be systematic, accepted, and invisible to those who benefit from it. Even across the vast gulf of 2,000 years, we should remember not just what the Romans achieved, but what that achievement cost and who paid the price.